Seeing a lot of people I know popping up in the
Great.
audience. Thanks
There's
all.
Yvette and Nathaniel.
Yeah, I saw Nathaniel and Dwight Smith and Emily Van Engel and a bunch of alumni. Fun
Yeah,
to see.
I know a lot of alumni here. This is great. It's great to see everyone kind of pop up too.
Lava, when were you at CCA?
99.
Ah, okay.
20 years ago.
I
Gosh,
Michelle
it's
and I
been
were
that
there
long.
30 years ago, but as undergrads.
And,
Yeah, 99, 20 years ago.
wow. And Lexa and Michelle, did you guys know each other at CCA? It looks like you have the same grad year.
Yeah. I remember, Michelle, you did that performance in the bathroom of the painting studio.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. No, it was, I started doing performances back then. Though I never studied performance. It's always been in my repertoire, but I never formally, yeah. So I know it's fun to have someone else from my graduation year here.
Yeah, and it's funny to just think about how many people actually are still making art, or publicly at least, and those
I know.
It's hard out there.
Right.
Yeah, I think that's a really important thing to acknowledge. I know a few more people are signing on here before we start, but I taught professional practices at CCA for 8 years, and I think the most challenging thing is for many artists to be able to continue working because you have to pay rent and bills, and to find the balance. And that's something really important to acknowledge for if there are any recent grads or some students that are here right now in attendance to realize that it's a balance, and it's a lifelong balance of figuring it out and just keeping going. Yeah. But do you want to maybe start here in a minute or two, Lisa?
I think we're starting to balance out. There might be a few people who continue to join, but I'm not seeing the ticker move as much anymore. So let's go ahead and get started. First, I want to welcome everyone to the Holding Patterns waiting room. I'm so glad that you guys could join us for our first event. And we're super excited to be launching this program with you three, Michelle, Lava, and Lexa. It's a great way to kick off this program. I'll introduce myself first. I'm Lisa Jonas. I'm the Alumni Engagement Director at CCA. I'm here with my colleague, Julietta Wurtzbest, who works with me on the Alumni Engagement team. We're both alumni of the college as well. And we started Holding Patterns back in early April, and sort of observing how, so many, projects and exhibitions and events and books and, performances in the arts and design community being affected by the pandemic. And we wanted to create a space for alumni to be able to come together and still share that work that now no longer had its original place where it could be shared, where we could support each other and, be in a space together, waiting until we are able to do all of those things again. And the waiting room, which we're launching today, is a place where we can come together and start having conversations and discussions around that. So I was, really thrilled, Michelle, when you reached out to me, wanting to bring some fellow alumni together around your project, the Art of Equal Pay. And it's, around the context of the pandemic too. So it's, a great way for us to kick this off. So before I get into some formal introductions, introducing the three of you, I wanted to go through a couple housekeeping things for those of us who are watching today. So the way today is going to go is I'll introduce our three alumni artists, and they're going to share a bit about their work and their current practice and, you know, how that's happening right now. And then Michelle's going to lead everyone in a discussion about the art of equal pay and the pandemic. And then we'll close with a Q&A. So pointing out a couple things at the bottom of your Zoom window there. Down at the bottom, you'll see a sort of a single chat bubble that says chat. Some of you guys have used it to say hi already. That's where I'm going to be placing everyone's links, everyone's Instagram handles. I'm gonna drop in the holding patterns handle right now. So anybody who isn't following the project already, please do so on Instagram. I'll be adding more throughout the program so that you guys can go to folks' websites, see them on Instagram and follow them there. The second thing I want to point out is the to chat bubble that says Q&A. Throughout the program, if you have a question for our panelists, please go ahead and type it there. I'll be monitoring it. At the end of the program, I'll read those questions and they'll get answered at the end. So let's go ahead and get started. I'll formally introduce you now. Let me just pull up your bios real quick. So Michele Pred is a Swedish-American conceptual artist whose practice includes sculpture, assemblage, and performance. Her work uncovers the cultural and political meaning behind everyday objects with a concentration on feminist themes such as equal pay, reproductive rights, and personal security. Pred's project also contains social components that drive the conversation into public spaces. Examples include her exploration of the intersection of personal space and security by using airport confiscated items after 9/11, the cultural background of the fight for reproductive rights using thousands of expired birth control pills, and the continuing economic political struggle for women's rights, represented by her modified vintage handbag editions. Michele is represented by Nancy Hoffman Gallery in New York, and she graduated from CCA in 1990 with a BFA in interdisciplinary fine arts. Lava Thomas tackles issues of race, gender, representation, and memorialization through a multidisciplinary practice that spans drawing, painting, photography, sculpture, and site-specific installations. Her practice centers ideas of visibility, resilience, and empowerment in the face of erasure, trauma, and oppression. Thomas graduated from CCA in 1999 with her BFA and studied at UCLA's School of Art Practice. She is represented by Irina Branston Gallery here in San Francisco. Lexa Walsh is an artist, cultural worker, and experience maker. She employs social engagement, radical hospitality, performance, sculpture, installation, text, and institutional critique in her projects, objects, and exhibitions. Her upbringing as the youngest child of 15 informs her work, as does practicing collectivity while coming of age in the Bay Area post-punk cultural scene of the 1990s. She graduated from CCA with her BFA in 1990 and has an MFA from Portland State University's Art and Social Practice program. So I'm going to share my screen now and you guys can jump into your talks.
Okay, so Lava, would you like to start and talk about, oh, sorry, I guess I'm starting.
You're up.
I'm up. Okay, then I'll start. Here is one of my pieces from the series called Power of the Purse. I started this series in 2004. And at that time, it was solely focused on reproductive rights and pro-choice. The first year, and from that first show with these pieces, I donated 5% of all the proceeds to NARAL. And excuse me, this was 2003. And have since then been donating a percentage to either NARAL or Planned Parenthood. all along from these series. But I originally thought I was going to do the series of 50 pro-choice purses, and then it moved into 2016 and the election, and it was really focused on expanding on making sure everyone went out to vote, taking an intersectional approach. If we can go back to the other slide, I'll talk about this one a little bit later. And the terminology, the quotes from Trump, and it just started building up the series because I was responding to so much what was happening culturally and politically. Trump was lashing out, you know, nasty woman, and grab him by the pussy, and it just felt like a way for me to release and these thoughts and ideas and anger we had as women. And these to me also represent bodies in many ways, the purses. So they have just continued since then. I really thought this was going to be a series that went on for about a year. And I think I might have said 2004. If I did, I meant 2014. And just as an example, and since we're in the holding patterns, waiting room, this particular piece was supposed to be in a show at the V&A Museum in London, opening up in April. They've now pushed it to November, and I don't foresee that happening. So one of the things we can talk more about later, but there's shows that are being pushed forward, and they're going to have to get pushed forward even more. There's no way this can be in a show opening up in November. So I'm curious to see how things flow into 2021 and beyond, and if some of these shows even end up happening. I mean, these are some of the thoughts that I have in my head. But these purses have gotten into really focusing also on equal pay and equal rights. My approach is very intersectional. It's very important to me. So those and voting, I mean, those are some of the topics that are really important to me today. But also, and moving on to the parades, also in response to Trump, and basically so much of what I do is in response to what's happening politically. Lisa, if you could move over to the next slide, is in 2017, I started quite sort of spontaneously what turned out to be a series of parades, feminist art parades. I planned it 3 weeks in advance before Art Miami, and it was right when the Me Too movement was starting to take off and explode, and I felt like I really had to respond in a public manner. And so the first parade against patriarchy, took place in Miami 2017, and then it was I curated artists, and sort of some of my favorite artists that were around were available. I know, Love, I think I at least asked you to come, you know, see or participate, but, you know, sort of, but it's such a busy place and time at these fairs. But I actually basically asked a bunch of artists whose work I love, and some of them were coming to Miami, some of them were not. And so some of them in turn came to Miami for the parade, and I didn't know what I was doing. I didn't have a permit. I knew I needed one, but it was too late to get one. And I think what really comes out of this, what's then turned into a practice of mine, is hope and community and radical love. I mean, that's what's so important to me. And as artists, we gather together with our artwork. And so really it's about artists carrying their artwork, focusing on the themes that we are parading for or against, as in the case for the patriarchy. And so it's now become a practice of mine. And I've done 4 since, or 4 coming up, also including the next one coming up. So we did, this one's from 2018. This is the We Vote Parade. And this was the weekend before the election in 2018. And then I did Untitled Art Fair in 2019. I did a parade, also in Sweden, actually, a Radical Love Parade last fall. And again, several of the people showed up that are part of sort of the core group of Vet Molina, who I think is watching. She's been one of the core members, and Bud Snow, and sort of, it's really great. Get to see, spend time with, and interact and work with some of my favorite artists. I mean, it's really exciting to me to work this way. This particular parade in New York, the biggest sort of feeling I left with was hope. And things, a lot of things did change, which was pretty exciting in 2018. Not enough, but moving forward at least. And so my next parade is going to be called Vote Feminist. It was to take place in real life in October this fall in Berkeley. It's now going to be on Zoom. So if people are interested in participating, feel free to DM me on Instagram or email me. And I'm curating it right now. I actually can invite a lot more people now from other parts of the country that might not have participated before. And was commissioned by the Berkeley Art Museum. And for the New Time exhibition, that's also been postponed to the spring. Lava's also in that exhibition. And it's a feminist exhibition. So the parade will still be taking place. And that will be taking place on November 1st. So please, again, let me know if you're interested in participating. Basically, we're gonna be sort of holding like a broadcast of a virtual parade where artists will walk through in their rooms or wherever they are with their artwork, or can say something. We'll have performances. So that's how that project has evolved. And then most recently, and of course, part of what we're focusing on today is the Art of Equal Pay. And I've been focusing on equal pay for years. And for years, been thinking, what can I do to instigate one small change, or at least, get the ball rolling a little more as far as a larger discussion, a more nationwide discussion and activism. And it finally in January just really hit me that it was really simple. And of course it's not simple at all, but how about asking women to raise their prices by 15%? And from all the research I've done, that's the average. That's the statistics are available. So obviously, depending on a number of different things, including age, race, LGBTQ artists. I mean, there's so many different factors of women, but the average that we have stats for is 15%. So I keep on having to really emphasize that, because I think it's much greater, but that's all the hard facts we have. And I also felt like that was a decent percentage to raise prices. So basically I launched it at Frieze Art Fair in LA, and this is the art newspaper did an article about it. It's also received great recognition from Ms. Magazine and Gloria Steinem and Art News and Playboy even, actually. And so Lava and Lexa are participants in the project, and different women, it depends on their stage in their career. Some women may not be actually raising the prices 15% because they're at a place where they're actually receiving their due, but in solidarity, those artists are joining and signing up and pledging their support. But basically, we're asking women and women-identified artists to raise their prices by 15%. Now, COVID came, so that changed everything. That the main activation was going to take place on March 31st, on Equal Pay Day, what's known as Equal Pay Day. And we couldn't do that because of COVID. It didn't make sense. Art, as we all know it, is barely selling right now, unless projects were already underway. People are really a standstill. And so I pivoted the project, I reimagined it, And now what we're doing is a series of activations on different pay equity days. And so the first one was on what was called Equal Pay Day, which is the average that women make compared to a white man. But then during the year, we're doing LGBTQ activation in June around Pride. We are doing an activation in August around Black women and pay equity, and then the same in September for Latinx women and pay equity. So we then are hoping to really activate on next year on Equal Pay Day and have the artists participating raise their prices permanently by 15% and to demand their due. So I want to, before I hand this over to, I'm not sure who's next, I really encourage you to sign up at the Art of Equal Pay. And you don't have to be an artist to support, and support, I mean, with your signature, you're pledging with a signature to support the cause. So whether you're a collector that's agreeing and saying, hey, I'm willing to pay 15% more for a female artist. I know at least one collector is on here right now, and I thank you for your support. We have male collectors signing up, which I really appreciate, who are saying, yes, of course, we'll pay higher amounts. And the same goes for the galleries, have to be willing to charge more. And we're also have organizations signed up to participate or show their support, art professionals and anyone who supports artists. So please sign up. It's very easy to jump on the website, and takes 20 seconds to participate. And then there'll be, like I said, Zoom meetings and other events coming up in the near future. So that's what I've been up to. I will add, as far as just how this fits in with COVID, is I had to pivot everything in the moment. And I'll talk about that a little more later, but in the moment, you know, I was about to do fundraising for the project. I had to stop that. And we were going to do the huge activation in March. I had to stop that and just figure out ways to recreate it and to go with the flow. I mean, I think that's what we're all trying to do right now. And it actually was nice to have more time with this project and really have a lot more time to let it evolve over a year. But the most challenging aspect was that even though I've not been tested, I most likely had COVID for 7.5 weeks when I was working on this. And that was challenging. I was sick for 7.5 weeks and mostly in bed and struggling up and doing these lounges and doing what I could. But I'm happy to say that I'm all better now. So we'll dive into more of what we're doing during this time, but this is the main project for me right now. And Lava Thomas is next.
Hello, everyone. I don't see myself in the box. I see you in the box, Michelle, but I don't see myself.
Do you see Lexa?
No, I only see you, but I'll continue. I'll leave that for the tech. We see you. Okay, good. The title of this piece is Freedom Song Number 5, We Shall Not Be Moved. And it's part of a larger body of work that honors the sacrifice, dedication, and commitment of civil rights activists whose struggle for equality and justice remain relevant and urgent today. And this body of work I began during the presidential campaigns, when, with all of the sexist and racist rhetoric coming out of the Republican campaign, and also looking at how civil rights, hard-won civil rights laws and protections were being rolled back, especially in regards to voting. So this piece recalls the protest songs in the African American music tradition, from spirituals, gospels, freedom songs. And it's comprised of tambourines with drawings of my Southern ancestors' eyes, based on photographs from my grandmother's photo album. So my family migrated from the South, from Texas to Los Angeles in 1943. We Shall Not Be Moved was sung during the 1965 march from Selma to Montgomery, when protesters for voting rights were met with deadly violence. And the lyrics speak to solidarity in the face of intimidation and an unyielding commitment to social justice, racial equality, and economic parity. So this piece in particular is part of a group exhibition, Come to Your Senses, Who Counts in America, at YBCA now, which we know that YBCA is closed, but it's part of an arts-driven campaign led by Art in Action, partnering with YBCA and San Francisco's Office of Civic Engagement and Immigrant Affairs. And this campaign galvanizes communities to participate in the 2020 census to receive their fair share of resources and political representation. So YBCA is closed, so no one can see the exhibition, but that campaign also includes a public art component. So all over the city now, you can see billboards and banners that are encouraging communities to participate in the 2020 census. And right now, this campaign is local to San Francisco, but there are plans to make it a national effort to make sure that communities are getting federal dollars for schools, for infrastructure, and that we receive adequate political representation. Okay, can you move on to the next slide? Okay, thanks. The title of this work, it's a life-size portrait. It's Lottie Green Varner. And this is part of a series of drawings from a project called Mugshot Portraits, Women of the Montgomery Bus Boycott. And there are about, there were 12 in the original series. There are a few more that I'm working on now. And this project illuminates the under-acknowledged leadership and labor of Black women in the civil rights movement. So when you think about the history of the civil rights movement, most of us think of Martin Luther King, Rosa Parks. We may think of a few other people, but the labor of women in that movement and the Montgomery bus boycott was a pivotal, it's one of the pivotal events. They haven't been recognized. So this body of work was really to revisit that era and to acknowledge the women's labor and rectify their erasure in that history. This piece is part of the Outland Buchever Triennial exhibition at the National Portrait Gallery. And as we know, the Smithsonian museums are closed, so we can't see this piece. Lisa, can you move to the next slide? Thanks. This is a detail of a larger tambourine installation that's comprised of over 600 tambourines. It was originally commissioned by the DeRosa Center for Contemporary Art, and it draws from the history of women's activism to establish a broader context for the pink wave of women's political agency. And it takes its cues from, visual cues from the 2017 Women's March with all of the pink hats. I created this piece because I was really thinking about solidarity. I wanted to create something that was forward-thinking and inclusive. And written on the tambourines are excerpts of political speeches throughout the history of women's activism. We have Mariah Stewart, who was the first African-American political writer. We have Sojourner Truth. We have Yuri Kochiyama. We have Dolores Huerta. We have Angela Davis. We have Doris Steinman. And I use the tambourine in this context as a symbol of power in the hands of the people. So I think that wraps up my part, talking about my work. Okay.
Thanks, Lava.
Mm-hmm.
And thank you, Michele, for having us. I'm Lexa, and interestingly, I met Lava at DeRosa through that project, which I'll show you soon. But I'll start out with I have a very vast practice that, though my degree at CCAC was in ceramic sculpture back in 1990, that moved over the years into social practice, and my MFA is in social practice. But throughout those years, I've been really interested in collections and archives, among other things. And I've been collecting ephemera from every art event and exhibit I've ever been to in my life for my lifetime. So I have boxes and boxes and boxes from around the world of show cards and other ephemera. And that led to me making an archive project in grad school, which then led to this project at the de Young. This is called Mapping the Archive. And I was invited as an artist fellow to do a year-long project, which was really great because I had the time to do a lot of research. And I was interested in posing this question of what made the Bay Area so prevalent in a post-studio practice. So there was just a lot of social practice and performance art and other post-studio based things that were happening. And I was interested in the socio-economic political climate that created that. So with the help of the public coming into the gallery and a lot of research and interviewing archivists, I made this 30-foot timeline. And I exhibited a lot of other people's archives and my own, including Ted Purvis's archive and some works from the San Francisco Arts Commission that from their poster series that they had not collected. And I was interested in sort of the questions of value of why is something an artwork versus an archival piece, what gets collected, what doesn't. And this work also had speakers like Tom Marioni spoke about his work, Jordan Stein talked about the Exploding Torium, Ted Purvis talked about his collection, and the Prellingers came and also talked about the Prellinger Library. So this work lives on in a website called mappingthearchive.com, and you can kind of click on and see this trajectory of post-studio practice. And I will say that the reason I'm showing this slide, besides that this project is dear to my heart, is that I'm starting and should be working on right now, and am to some extent, the Bay Area Contemporary Art Archive, which is an offshoot of this project, where I'm collecting ephemera from contemporary artists in the Bay Area and creating a physical archive and preservation society for ephemera. And this was supposed to have a physical collecting event this month. And now, of course, that has to be canceled. So now I'm really trying to reframe my mind and to make the collecting event online, which I think I just have Zoom fatigue and really want to be making with my hands more than being on the computer right now. But I'm in the works of working on the Bay Area Contemporary Archives. So we can go to the next slide. So continuing my interest with archives and collections, my brother Dan Walsh, who is a painter in New York, and I were invited to do a commissioned work with Williams College Museum of Art in 2016. And if you saw Dan's work and mine, you'd wonder how on earth we could work together. But we both have a kind of interest in perception and engagement. And he did a project many years ago called something 7 Grays, and that was the linking point where we could combine our practices, was his interest from 7 Grays. And together we chose many works from the collection at Williams, including, we had full access to the vaults. So we chose works that were interesting to us, were like just fabulous artworks. We also chose artworks that were damaged, artworks of questionable provenance, artworks that were, here are these dogs up here. And then we built these structures around which you could observe and play in the gallery. So this is just one shot of a really large scale installation. You can see behind me, that's another part of it. And it was a school museum, a college museum. So we also wanted places for learning. So we brought in architectural features from around the campus, like these, sorry, I'm having a menopausal moment where I can't think of the word for these things on top of the buildings here. the spires and things. And then we brought in chairs from different parts of campus. And all of the works surrounding you are portraits that are staring at you. And then in the adjacent room, we had a sort of conversation about our conflicting art education through stitch samplers that I stitched based on art theory back and forth, in a kind of witty repartee back and forth. And that was based on and inspired by the collection of stitch samplers in the collection at the museum. And then there were also readers available to read those works. And then in addition, we also did a lot of events based on that were in the space and that were based on the exhibition. So this was a really, really fun and influential project for me. And it to have a registrar who really wanted to kill me, I think, say yes to allow me to do these things with the collection was really amazing. So we can move on to the next. So that led to Be Not Still, and I was invited to curate the De Rosa collection in Be Not Still. And that was a really, again, I was allowing to myself, and I was allowed by the organization to kind of go a little bit crazy and unorthodox with their already pretty whimsical collection. And I almost anthropomorphized the figurative works in the collection to be staged in choreographies of protest. So I had 5 or 6 different groupings, and they were sort of evoking riot or protest or police lines, marches, vigils. And then there was also a big mural that was kind of evoking like a fire from a riot. And then on the walls, again, I used portraits that were staring at you. So as a visitor, you could become either a participant in the march or a witness of the march. And then there were several events. The education department did a really great job, I think, in promoting the exhibition in a deeper way through events. So I did a sew-in about the common good, and I did a tea talk about the common good, and I did a protest songwriting workshop. So, and there, my social practice, came in very strongly in all of these projects. And I think that'll sum it up. Thank you.
Yes, for this great opportunity to share what we've been doing. We're going to be talking now about a little more about the Art of Equal Pay, but then we're going to go into discussing how we're responding to living in quarantine and how that affects our art practice, and what shows have been canceled, how we're dealing with that, how we're pivoting during this time. But just to kind of jump back into the Art of Equal Pay, and Lisa, if you could, oh, it looks like you put that back in there. You can see the links here to the Art of Equal Pay and the upcoming Feminist Parade. So the first thing, just to kind of continue off the Art of Equal Pay, what it's turning into now, as well as the actual activation, is a group of additional projects like this, actually, where we come together in other platforms, in other ways, and either show our work or engage in different manners. We're in conversation, or I'm in conversation with the Berkeley Art Museum to do a takeover of their outdoor screen. And by takeover, I don't mean that we're going to have only our work up. They'll have their regular programming, but a way to create community with this group of artists, and especially represent local artists, since we are living here. Several of us who are participating will also be part of the New Time exhibition at the Berkeley Art Museum. So there's different opportunities to engage and in focusing on equal pay. So both Lexa and Lava are participants, like I mentioned before, and I wanted to ask just quickly, you know, either why you joined or what's your, why did you decide to join the Art of Equal Pay, Lexa?
Well, why not join? Like, of course, of course. But also, I don't usually make objects lately. So it was an opportunity, but I've been playing with objects in the last year. And it was an opportunity to be like, to frame my objects in a situation and you know, put them up in my shop and price them and think about what is their value. You know, I'm usually getting paid to do experiences, not make objects. So it's a kind of interesting way for me to think about my practice lately.
Great. I love your vagina trophies. They're amazing.
Thank you. They're on the way.
So where do you have them for sale?
I have them on my website in the shop.
Okay.
Because I don't know where else to put them because they're so
right. I highly recommend looking at them. I think it's at lexawalsh.com. And what about you, Lava? What sort of was your driving, you know, force of joining or participating in the Art of Equal Pay?
Well, I know your work. I respect your work, Michele, and I know your commitment to intersectional feminism and also your work with regard to reproductive rights and gender parity in the workforce. So it seemed like a good thing to be a part of. I very much am interested in how Black women's work is valued in the workplace. Mm-hmm. And I know that you're working with data and statisticians, and I really want to know what the price disparity is in terms of how our work is priced compared to white males, but also how our work is priced in comparison to white women. So since data is your material, joining this effort with you seemed like a good way to really dig into that and find the information that I wanted to know.
And through our discussions, actually, Lava, you know, I think the way a lot of people respond sort of as an excuse, well, that data doesn't exist. And that was my first thought. And then sort of my second thought immediately was, because, you know, I've been thinking the same, but then you questioned it further, is, well, let's figure out a way to create that. Mm-hmm. And, you know, there needs to be some funding behind it, but it is possible. And it's, you know, a matter of fighting, and still Artsy is the biggest database. It doesn't represent everyone, of course, but it's a database to start from. And so I'm actually, via the data scientists I've been working with, we're approaching them with saying, well, how can we pull these stats? And so it would be, they have all the people in the database, so it would be an extra questionnaire where they would be reaching out. So it doesn't exist as of right now, but there's nothing wrong with saying, okay, we're going to do a couple more surveys or another survey, and those who wish to respond can and will. So it's a platform to work from. And why it's helpful, I think, is because there's such a large amount. Now, it doesn't cover everyone, and I don't want to suggest that in any sort of way, but it's a way to get a lot of people. And I think there's other ways to consider for that as well. But it is something that is essential to talk about. Again, the same for our LGBTQ artists and other artists of color. So it's kind of a massive project. And when I started this project, it was more conceptual, and I thought, oh, I'll do this. And then I realized this is actually way bigger than me. But I think during this COVID era, I'm up for it. You know, it's sort of like I'm not been making that much physically work, and this has sort of helped pull me through, and this is something I can do from home. So, you know, I appreciate that, Lava, you've pushed me further and said, well, let's, you know, like, let's take it further. I mean, I think it's an easy answer, and the way a lot of people function in this country, well, it's, you know, sort of like, well, it doesn't exist, or we don't operate that way. Well, it's like, there's also a way to create that, that I truly believe in. So I also wanted to ask, I'm curious, but also to share a little more. Lexa, so what we're gonna do is several activations during the year, and then seeing how things are next year during Equal Pay Day. Then the artists that are participating will raise their prices, or the artists that are participating, some may not, but they're participating in other ways. But Lexa, are there ways that you would like to see that we're not doing? I mean, that goes to both of you, how it might evolve during the year, or other ideas that either one of you have for the project?
I think it just needs to not be forgotten. I think that this needs to not become a token thing, but really like become an all around, you know, unite women, let's raise our prices, all of us. And this is this artful way of doing it is a great spark and real. It's both conceptual and real, but I would like to see it create like real large scale change. And I think the more activations, I loved the talks that we did for the first month, that you had different guests every week. And I know that's a lot of work for you, but just keeping the momentum up, I think, is super important. But you're doing a great job. No critique. I want more.
No, I think it's great to talk about other, you know, approaches, and just to share again, we will be doing other activations starting again in June, as far as activations and Zoom lounges, and then we'll be focusing on our LGBTQ plus artists, as well as curators and collectors. So each time we'll bring in different people from the community, again with Black women and Latinx women. So I think that's really important, to pull different people in, have different discussions that focus on different issues that apply to the different groups that we're focusing on. Yeah, Lava, do you have anything to add to that, or?
I'd love to see the data. I think that for me, that is the main thrust of the way that I'd like to see the project evolve. Because once we see those numbers, then we can, okay, you mentioned 15%, 16% sort of across the board rate raise of prices. But I think once we start really looking at the numbers, we'll see that in order to really achieve equity and parity, that those numbers for Black women and for women of color are going to be higher. And I think that it's important for institutions, museums, and collectors to have access to that information, so that when they want to acquire, they take that into consideration. And I think that hard data is really important. That's really what I'd like to see happen with the project.
Yeah, it's something actually I'd love to talk about with you more, Lava, offline. But that is a commitment of mine, definitely. Now I'd like to focus on sort of how we've all been experiencing this time. You know, are you still working? What are you working on? Has that changed since COVID? Who would like to start with that question?
Lava?
Okay, I'll jump in. Sure. You know, when the shelter-in-place order initially came down, I didn't really work very much because just the interruption in my ability to work was something that I had to manage. I have an 11-year-old, so all of a sudden he's doing remote learning at home with a lot of the responsibility on both me and my husband. I didn't have access to my regular studio or assistant, so you know, the way that I had to work changed. And it took a while actually for me to start thinking about making work about the era that we're in. I'm a slow processor. So what I found was kind of pulling in, focusing on family, getting all of that organized, gardening, which is something that I didn't have really much time for before, doing some experiments in the studio, but then reading all of the press, and I was just, you know, glued to the screen for a while and seeing how COVID was disproportionately affecting communities of color, Black folks, women, essential workers, looking at how Black women were both leading policy. We think about the Black mayors who were keeping their cities shut down when their governors were insisting upon opening it. And even here in the Bay Area, how London Breed is she was one of the early mayors who put the shelter in place in San Francisco that I'm sure saved a lot of lives. So thinking about low wage workers, women of color, Black women who are in healthcare jobs that can't stay home. So I started behind me, I have a study of a small drawing of a woman wearing a mask and thinking about how the mask has become this political symbol. Really, it's no longer something that is a public health object to keep us safe. It's become something that's really polarizing, where the right is insisting upon individual freedoms not to wear a mask. And I mean, it's ridiculous. And where women are working in these essential jobs without even adequate PPE. So that's where I'm starting with this work. And yeah, it'll be interesting to see how this turns out.
I'm really interested in just riffing off of what you said, and I hadn't noticed. I saw the piece in the background, but I hadn't acknowledged it as a mask covering her face until now that you mentioned that. It looks like it's
negative space. Yeah. That's the whole. I
love it.
The top part of the drawing is fully fleshed out. Where the mask is negative space. It's not fully drawn as a mask, so that you can essentially project all of these different layers of meaning onto it.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. It just makes me think right away of how it'd be interesting to the way my mind works as curate a show. I have to show you some of the things I've been working on that are working on masks as well. And as it pertains to the election and my Power of the Purse series, this is going to be a mask. These are all potential, of course, but
okay.
It's coin purse. This is a mask made out of an election ballot.
Oh, wow.
So I think it is interesting how different people are responding to what we're experiencing. Mm-hmm. And is this going to be, Love, is this going to be a larger piece?
I'm not sure yet. You know, since I'm confined to smaller spaces, I mean, I do have room to work a little larger, but it's more comfortable now. I don't have a lot of extended periods of time You know, I'm interrupted all the time. So right now, these smaller pieces seem more achievable. I have some larger works, as you can see in the back, that I need to complete. But for this new body of work, I mean, we'll see. You know, the work evolves.
And so you're working, you have you mentioned once a smaller studio on your property. So is that where you're working mainly from right now? Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I've been needing to work from home, and I don't have a studio here, so it's made it challenging, and I think that's why.
It's challenging, yeah.
And what about you, Lexa? You have a
studio shed.
You have a studio at your house, right?
No, I have a studio in Oakland that I share with my partner, so it's safe to go there.
Oh, it's open.
Yeah, and it's huge. We just have it ourselves. It's huge and it's cheap. So I'm there all the time, and it's really been a gift actually to have this time. For all the horrors, it's actually like allowed me to play in the studio and to also approach activist artwork, which a lot of my socially engaged work is by nature, but you know, I'm not usually making activist projects, but also I'm obsessed with the news and obsessed with this shit show that is our response is the United States. So so I'm making these, I have a bunch of clay leftovers. I've been making these ceramic disinformant bottles, which are like disinfectant bottles with misinformation by Trump. And then I've been making some prints, and then I've been playing around with I've been making ceramic trophies that once I can finish them, I'm hoping people can then offer them up to somebody who deserves a trophy. The only problem is I've been able to bisque fire all of these things, but not glaze fire them because the ceramic studio where I usually work is closed. But eventually it will be open somehow. And playing with fabric, yeah, I mean, it's just like a chance for me to really sort of experiment with object making again. And I should be at a residency right now in Southern California working with Radical None. And of course I can't be there. They're still doing their work. One of them just wrote me the other day saying they're still inviting the homeless into their apartment because they all live scattered around in this town in Southern California. And they invite the homeless in every week to come and shower and eat. And they're really like putting themselves, they are also frontline workers, these radical sisters, which is amazing. Yeah, so I feel like my practice is completely changing. I'm just not, the thing I hate about social practice is all the organizing on the computer. There's so many meetings and emails to get to the event. So that's, although I might change, if this goes on forever, I might have to change my tune, but I'm just not that interested in working on the computer right now. So I'm taking advantage of the space I have. I have a bevy of weird materials hanging around and I'm just playing. And I would never let myself do that normally. So it's been kind of a gift and I feel really, really lucky.
The one thing I want to acknowledge, I know we're going to move over to Lisa here in a second, is, and I think it's really important to talk about, and if anyone else wants to jump in briefly here, you're welcome to, but I for everyone watching, I think it's important to acknowledge that the challenges too during this time. I know I sometimes sit alone with them and it's hard. You know, how we're coping. I haven't made as much as I would like to. And just to sort of share that, I know I've experienced it quite a bit. What's saving me is going out for walks. And I've been doing that either virtually with friends, we're just talking on the phone, or in real life, and walking 4 or 5 miles almost every day. And that's been my saving grace. But I just want to kind of, I don't know if we have time, if anyone else wants to comment on that, but just to acknowledge and hold on to that, you know, as we're creating, that this is a really challenging time to be creatives.
Yeah. No, I'm so aware of how much folks are suffering right now. And I'm incredibly grateful that although it's challenging and I'm impacted, I can shelter in place. I can be with my family. I don't have to go out and work and place myself at risk. I'm saddened by the fact that this pandemic really has laid bare the inequities that we've already known, but it seems like it's happening in such a condensed space of time, and being covered by the press for the world to see. So one of the ways that I'm dancing.
Oh,
You know,
good for you.
I'm dancing, and it brings me joy, which I need right now, because I mean, for all of us that are paying attention, what's coming out of this pandemic is horrific. So we have to take care of ourselves in ways that we can.
Yeah, I am walking and I'm dancing. And I'm cooking. I mean, I actually cook professionally too as my side gig, and I'm actually just cooking for us, and it feels like I'm actually enjoying it, and I'm cooking for others. I'm sending food out to people. My partner's baking bread for others. It just feels like just nourishing, feeling like the need to nourish ourselves and others is really important. It's because I also feel really lucky. And the one really interesting thing is my family is having Zoom meetings every Saturday, which, you know, there are about 20, 25 of us there at once. And it's really kind of amazing. We never see each other that often. So, and my mother's 92. So I feel like it's really important for us to spend this time together. And luckily everyone has their health. So.
I think, Lisa, you wanted to go into the Q&A.
Yeah, if that sounds good to you guys, if you're ready to move on. First, thank you guys for such great presentations and for such candid conversation too. It's, you know, I think really important for us to have space for this right now. And we have a couple questions that have come in during the program that I'll read here in a second, but I want to invite you guys to continue typing into the Q&A. If you do have a question, we will try to get to all of them before it's time to wrap up. So I'll start with this one. What about alternate forms of pay that aren't about cash dollar currency, that aren't linked to capitalism? How might we re-envision the possibilities of exchange, trade, or share practices?
But we see Stephanie Sahuko has already started an exchange on Facebook. You know, I got 2 kitties and a bunch of plants and a bunch of other things just for some soup stock and some fabric.
Sorry, I disappeared there. Yeah, I think it's really important to think about that during this time. I've seen that Stephanie's sort of opening that up on her page. And I don't know, I think she's here. She was here. Mm-hmm. If she's opening up, well, she might have left. No, she's still here. You know, maybe that could be a bigger project on Instagram, or not necessarily that she has to drive, but I think it's a great way of us thinking that way. It's a way we need to think just moving forward in our culture, of how we can support each other in different ways without an exchange of money. She also asked here, I'm also wondering about all the free offerings online and what it feels like an expectation or assumption to provide education information for free. That's also something that Stephanie has been focusing on a lot. I don't know if you guys have a response to that, Lava or Alexa.
You know, I think some of this free information needs to be monetized. Honestly, I do. I mean, I am glad that there's so much content now that we can't gather in person, we can't attend talks, but honestly, for every talk that live talk that I've participated in, I've received an honorarium. You know, that's sort of standard practice. So since there is the ability for so many people to join these kinds of things, even a small subscription, something I think would really benefit the artists and cultural producers and creatives who are participating. Because right now we are asked, I don't know if this is true for all of you, but we are asked to provide content for this time when we can't go to galleries, when we can't go to talks. Creatives are already sort of at the bottom of the economic ladder. I hate to say it, but it's true. And then we're asked to provide free services because everything is closed. So I really do feel like there needs to be a way to monetize some of these offerings that are virtual offerings. And it doesn't have to be expensive. You know, it really doesn't. I subscribe to a daily, it's a daily post of art, and I think I pay $5 a month for it. You know, there are ways to do this, and I think as artists and creatives and problem solvers, we need to come up with some ways to get paid.
I agree with that. In fact, what I've done now on the Art of Equal Pay is set up a donation page for just these kind of things. And even though it's very hard to do any fundraising right now for the project, I am reaching out to individual donors to see if they will, if they will fund or help sponsor one of the upcoming lounges, so that, because we're talking about labor and pay and equal pay, that's the focus of the Art of Equal Pay, that artists are, reimbursed in some sort of way. And yes, it might not be able to be a huge amount, but that's always been a really key element for me, as far as including artists in my parades and whatnot. So I think that's a great way to start thinking, and for us to start asking for as well.
And this is just an extension of artists constantly being expected to do things for free. It's not new. It seems to be just amplified right now. And there still is 70% of the population that is getting paid, or whatever the percentage is. And
yeah. What are some of the other questions you had, Lisa?
There's a quick follow-up to this one. I'm going to shout out Stephanie again. Stephanie's last name is Sujuko, and there is a question about how our attendees might be able to see some of these projects that you have mentioned. And I am not sure what link I should post. So if any of you want to drop it in the chat, or Stephanie, if you are still tuning in, if you want to drop it in the chat, I can cut and paste so that everyone here can see if that's something that you'd like to share. And then we have a question for Lava from one of our attendees. They have the pleasure of seeing your installation of the tambourines at the DeRosa. The space with your installation was truly transformational, making the viewer experience intimate and personal. Would you consider creating other forms to present this work, like a book or a video? It's an important piece that I believe can transcend space.
Yes, I just haven't thought about that yet. Remember, we haven't been able to create work for what has it been, a couple of months now, and I have works in the I have the beginnings of large scale installation works in the studio now, and now I have to pivot to think about alternative ways to present that work and make that work accessible. So No, I haven't had a chance to really think about that yet, but yes, I do need to think about it. So thank you for that.
Great. And then I don't see any other questions coming in right now. If anyone else watching had anything they wanted to sneak in here at the end, please do so. Otherwise, we could start wrapping it up.
I do think that, didn't you mention, Lisa, there was a question?
Oh,
email.
Reminding me. Yeah, we had a, thanks, Michelle. We had a question come in from one of our attendees before we started, and it was, what would, you know, during this time, how would emerging artists maybe reapproach how they would approach a gallery in this moment? You know, so many of those community moments that we typically have are gone now. How can we rethink that?
I'd like to respond to that. I mean, I think right now, I hate to say it, right now is not the time to approach a gallery, because galleries themselves are reevaluating how they're going to present themselves. I don't think, very few galleries are taking on any new artists. And I just want to also note this, Stephanie just responded in the chat. Thanks, Stephanie. And I think the most important thing is to think about what you can create. I mean, I think that's what I've done all along. So creating my own opportunity or show. And a show right now, I mean, I've been reading about so many different versions, you know, setting it up on a sidewalk in front of your house and putting it out on social media. There's so, you know, if you have it, somehow you have access to a storefront window and can sit in the storefront window and do a performance or put up work. I think it really comes down to people creating things virtually and having people gather together and come up with a new idea, a different idea, and see how you can do it virtually. I mean, we're going to do a virtual parade, and we're going to, you know, be commentators, you know, on a TV show, and I think you just have to be really innovative. And unfortunately, right now is not a time to even sell artwork. People aren't buying artwork, so it's other ways of, you know, finding opportunities but really creating your own path. I think that's the biggest advice I have, is creating your own path.
Yeah, can I add that, like, if there's ever a time to be gritty and DIY, it is now. And anything goes, you know, so do it.
Great, and we have one more that just came in. If we have, maybe we'll take time for one more. While you are being kept away from projects you were doing, what are you doing to stay in touch with the thoughts and processes about those distant projects so that you'll be able to pick them up again when the time comes, especially when everything is so loud and distracting from those thoughts you were having in the before times?
Who's going to respond to that?
It's hard, I'll just say, to be, I'm a real out of sight, out of mind person. I've got a lot of pieces in a lot of places, and I'm really trying to be present. So, and planning seems so ridiculous, you know, so I have some like lists and charts to keep me in tune of the things that are like in my world, but I'm not doing a very good job of being in touch with, say, projects that are in other places that have been postponed to some unknown time.
Yeah, I think so much is unknown and floating around that I'm just trying to get my walk in every day. That's sort of that's keeping me sane. But yeah, I've had to minimize you know, my project so I can focus more and sort of just hone in and on simpler ideas. And I think keeping sort of mentally healthy is just the best thing to do right now, is
Mm-hmm.
talk to your friends and try to engage as much as possible. And for those of you who are comfortable, I'm, social distancing with friends, whether it's a picnic in the park or a walk. But I think that's what helps me kind of put aside time to do some work.
If I'm drawing, I'm happy. So even though this time that we're in is unprecedented in my lifetime, at least, as long as I stay connected to my practice and drawing, it's not so much a daily thing, but it's certainly something that I have to do it. And it brings me not just joy, but it keeps me connected to the ideas that run through all of my work, which is to acknowledge and increase the visibility of Black women and make sure that our voices are heard, that our concerns are addressed, and that we're seen and respected. So I'm never really far away from that as long as I'm in the studio. And I feel very fortunate that I have a small space here where I can continue my work.
I want to also acknowledge, I know we're about to wrap it up here, but I mean, like you did earlier, Lava, that us being even able to shelter in place and work, it's a privilege.
It is a privilege, yes.
And I want to really acknowledge that
Yes.
because there are a lot of other people who are, I can't go to my studio. It's just starting to open up, but I could work at home. I have no money coming in from my art sales, but I have money saved up. So I do want to really acknowledge so many more people out there that are not experiencing what we were able to do as artists. And I think that's why we really need to use this time and energy to focus on helping and supporting other people. And like you said, really, honing in on the issues and broadcasting them in the ways that we can as artists.
Wonderful. Thank you. I think that's a great note to wrap up on. And thank you all for, Michele, Lava, and Lexa for being here today to, help do that and, have this conversation and to bring more of our alumni community, our CCA community, and the wider arts and design community into that. I want to thank everyone for coming to our first waiting room. And as we close out, I want to give a quick update about our next program, which will be on Friday, May 29th at 10 a.m. MFA writing alum Alka Joshi is going to be here. She published her debut novel, The Henna Artist, literally right when this pandemic started. And it's already number 14 on the New York Times bestsellers list and is Reese Witherspoon's May book club pick. So she's going to be here next week on Friday to talk about what it was like to launch a book during this time, how she navigated that and adjusted. And she'll be joined by 3 henna artists who are going to be in discussion with her about how practices that are intimately rooted in physical proximity have needed to shift during this time. I'm going to drop our Instagram handle for the Holding Patterns Project in the chat again, so that anyone who wants to make sure you get information about that can do so. I'm also going to drop the link for next week's Zoom in the chat too, if anyone wanted to access it right away. And also just point out that we had a lot of links put in the chat throughout our discussion and the presentations today. The Michele, Lexa, and Lava's links are all in there. Several of the projects that they've talked about. Thank you to our attendees who sent in some links as well that I was able to share. So as I close out, I'll leave the chat up for a little bit longer. So you guys have time to go in there and copy and paste anything that you might not have seen. I know there's a lot to follow on these Zoom screens. Anyway, I want to just thank you all again. Thank you, Michele. Thank you, Lava. Thank you, Lexa.
Oh, thank you.
Thank you all.
Yeah,
Yep,
this has been
thank you all.
terrific. And yeah,
And thank you to all the attendees that joined us today.
yeah, thank you. And yeah, this is just such a terrific way to launch this waiting room.
Thank you. And please join us at theartofequalpay.com and sign up. Bye.